We were supposed to get the revolution going by May of 1964. I would call my leadership and I tell them, look, this is what we have to do. We have to get the people on our side because the communists have a bigger membership than we do. So you have to go out there and pull the membership away from them. See, and this is where the idea of training our leadership to go to Front Royal came into being.
This is J. Peter Grace, and he says here, AIFLD men also helped drive communists from control of British Guiana. They prevented the communists from taking over powerful unions in Honduras and helped to drive the communists from strong jugular unions in Brazil. Could you go back to that period and sort of describe what the atmosphere was in Latin America?
Well, we were living in the early 60s. I think, Andy, you would agree with me, in an era when we were in the streets battling for the lives of the free trade union movement against what was then a more powerful communist trade union movement that since then, in my estimation, has lost an awful lot of its appeal and its attraction and its ability to maneuver.
I was doing just exactly what Bill Doherty had done for years and years in Brazil. See, not only in Brazil, but all over the country, all over the Latin American countries. So Bill Doherty now heading the AIFLD was the same type of operation. Go around buying people. So I would recommend maybe 6, 7, 8 people, which were good potentials as labor organizers, and I would put them on a plane, send them down to Front Royal. They would be paid there. They got their lodging, their meals, the whole works, and then I would support their families in Brazil.
And was this part of the preparation for what happened in 1964?
That was the object of the whole thing.
A half a world away, troops are called out in the suburbs of Rio de Janeiro to quell rioting over President João Goulart's attempts to form a new Brazilian government after the resignation of Prime Minister Tancredo Neves and his cabinet. Food stores are looted as dealers hold back supplies of beans, rice, and other staples because they feel government price controls are set too low. Order is restored, but not before 11 persons are killed and a crippling general strike is called over the power struggle between the president and the parliament of Brazil.
Says Mr. Doherty, quote, "What happened in Brazil on April 1st did not just happen, it was planned, and planned months in advance. Many of the trade union leaders, some of whom were actually trained in our institute, were involved in the revolution and in the overthrow of the Goulart regime."
Immediately prior to the military takeover in Brazil, there was a group of students from Brazilian unions in training in Front Royal. This wasn't the first of the Brazilian groups that have been here, nor has it been the last. We've had them continuously. They weren't in any kind of a course training for revolutionary activities or clandestine activities. They were in a regular collective bargaining course. It so happens that when many of those students went back home from that course, their unions were involved in this struggle against the attempt of the communists to take over some of the unions, and that's precisely what I meant by the statement.
I can say to you categorically now that it is not true. Well, under no circumstances have we ever received or solicited any money from the CIA.
It doesn't say that the AFL-CIO received it. The $33 million doesn't go to the AFL-CIO. It goes to the AIFLD.
Let me state that these unions you mentioned have stated just as categorically as I have that they do not receive and have not received CIA money.
The communists are going to accuse anything that is effective as being CIA, because I think the CIA and the communist KGB have long been involved in an international struggle. The truth of the matter is that our books are now and always have been open to the public. Our funds, our government funds, are appropriated by the Congress. The congressional committees have all total access to them.
I was keeping books and everything else where all my expenses were going. When they came to me, they sent a curio and they said, you know, we understand you have books and everything else, you know. And I said, how in the hell do you know? We know what you don't know. We don't want you to keep books. We don't want you to keep any records at all. Because what would happen if the communists would raid your office, huh? Then they would know who's getting money from us, you know, what you're spending money on and everything else. As long as you show results, we don't care what you do with the money. So I used to travel with briefcases full of money, hello.
Didn't you also use that money, for example, to buy weaponry?
No, I didn't, because my field workers did that. They did that actually on their own. No? They were aware of the fact that we were having a revolution, no? And the day was going to come.
An exiled Brazilian colonel had this to say. In 1961, the CIA started an internal preparation for a military coup. First, they created a propaganda network with specialized personnel. And these people attempted to exploit all of the government errors and difficulties. And in the meanwhile, they spread disinformation, and they created slogans which had nothing to do with the real situation. And all of this was to prove to the broad masses of people that Brazil was on its way to communism and that democracy had to be defended. So they organized CAMDE, the Women's Campaign for Democracy. And they directed this principally at women, playing on the feeling that women mainly have for the family and religion.
We began these so-called marches for God and peace, the so-called pots and pan demonstration. We talked in terms of hundreds of thousands. They were demonstrating in Rio and in Sao Paulo, and I think it was the women that obliged the military to move in and take over. That happened in Chile 10 years later. Almost the whole scenario was the same, which leads one to believe that there may have been some Brazilian advisors, or some Brazilian advisors in Chile at the same time, fomenting the revolution against Allende.
On the day before the coup, Castillo Branco, who was then the chief of the Army General Staff, could not make up his mind. He wasn't sure that the coup would be successful. General Vernon Walter personally went to tell him that, yes, he should join the coup because, in case it was needed, the American fleet and naval task force was sailing close to the coast of Espiritu Santo, where the Marines would land to support the coup forces. And it was for this reason that Castillo Branco decided to support the coup.
Anti-Goulart demonstrations that greeted the now deposed Brazilian president at Miami airport when he was en route to take office in 1961 show the deep distrust that has finally led to his downfall and exile in Uruguay. Troops had to be called out in Brasilia to quell the bitter protests of thousands against the notoriously left-leaning João Goulart's taking office. A Russian trade show in Rio de Janeiro gave President Goulart, who paradoxically is a millionaire rancher, a chance to hobnob with some of his Soviet heroes. But it was his sympathies with nearer-at-hand Fidel Castro that the Brazilians really feared. Riotings against Goulart were frequent, yet when the end of his regime came, it was through a brief and bloodless military coup. What his successors can do with the almost totally wrecked economy he leaves behind him is a matter of concern to the entire Western Hemisphere.
Did you have arms stashed right there in your office?
Yeah, they were right there in my closet, yeah.
What kind of weapons were they?
Shit, you name it. Machine guns, all types of weapons. Huh?
Did your field workers participate at all in that coup? What'd they do?
They burnt out the communist headquarters. They burnt up the whole damn building. My own people. All I knew was that the communists had been put away in prisons. The military had brought in ships, put them in the bay, and confined the communists, you know, put them in ships, locked the doors, and thrown the keys away and whatever.
So were a lot of communists in the labor movement there that you knew about put in jail?
There were more of them than us. More.
And they were all jailed?
They were all thrown in jail.
I remember my family was very much against the Goulart government. They were very happy with the coup. The coup did answer the middle class's earnings for better order and against the inflation. I mean, the middle classes were quite prepared for that kind of thing. That Goulart was bringing communism, and communism would bring down family, property, and no more order, law. And that's where my family, more or less, very typically of the rest. I was in a secondary movement, secondary students movement. Little by little, I started getting closer and closer to the people on the left. In 65, 66, and 67, the student movement was the first one to start reorganizing again. There were many different demonstrations against the government, but one of them in early March 68, they were protesting for a better restaurant, and a student was killed. And that sparkled a whole chain of demonstrations, and more people got killed, and more demonstrations, because by then the petty bourgeoisie that in 64 was for the coup started suffering because of the coup. The military government brought in a lot of repression. People started actually being arrested and taken to court and being tortured.
The police program began on a large scale under Dwight Eisenhower. He felt there was a need to train the police to help with the fighting of communism after the Second World War. He recruited for the purpose a man named Byron Engel. Byron Engel was, by the time he came into this program, a member of the CIA. After the Bay of Pigs, Engel's program was much expanded. Police from around the world were brought and trained by U.S. advisors. The training was to make them more efficient, but a third of the training was given over in one way or another to make them aware of the communist menace and to go back into their countries to fight communism.
Immediately when you're arrested, you have to tell your house. We're supposed to. They force you. They try to force you to tell where you live, other addresses you know, where you meet, because that's where they get their information from. The situation is so difficult that they dare not put infiltrators. They have not courage, no possibility of actually infiltrating the left. It's too dangerous. So the only way they get their information is through torture.
Whenever one could get the information about a specific high-ranking official in torture, not one of these men off the street, but a man who had based his career on his ability to extract information from political prisoners. In the cases that I investigated, I found that they had been trained at a United States base.
Well, they started asking some questions, they wouldn't say anything, and then they started immediately torturing me after the doctor left. And, I mean, it's the same story of so many people. It's torture, electric shocks, and beatings, and telephones, and finally, it's a few hours like that.
Many of the people I spoke with, exiles, political exiles in Europe, had been tortured with U.S. Army field telephones. They were simple, they were easy to operate, and we had sent them in large numbers as part of our military assistance plan. You hook up wires to the telephone, and you put one wire perhaps on a man's penis and another in his mouth. When they're put in the mouth, the torturer uses a rubber glove. This is done with a certain degree of surgical precision. There is no embarrassment among the torturers, I was told, about the handling of genitals. Although when women are tortured, oftentimes the higher ranking officials will find an excuse to come by and watch the torture.
I decided that I would confirm everything they wanted. It was in such a condition, they certainly wouldn't settle for less. and I didn't want to go through any more torture. I was ideologically, I was weak enough to say, if they know, why not?
What we brought to it, what we as the United States, through our efficient system brought, was the sense that you used only the amount of torture appropriate to get information. And the reason torture persists is that although the cant among the police officers is that torture is not an effective way to get information, it of course is.
The torture is a necessity of the system, not because some minds, sick minds think of it, but because the resistance continues to grow. It's a sporadic, in small form, but it's always there. Torture is the answer to that.